And we're back recording. Right. So we've learned like the basic kinds of, okay, you know, cheaty, extend quickly, hit fast kinds of movements. Sometimes you can just, through sheer luck, kind of end up at extension distance. And as long as you're non-telegraphic, hit your opponent. Sometimes you can cheat a bit by squatting. But most of the time you're going to need to do a lunge. Although the lunges you do in knife are not full lunges. They're what we'd probably term half lunges or demi lunges. The reason being is if I do a full big lunge, unless my lunge is super fast and I time it well, my opponent's got enough reaction time to slip back and cut my hand. And because, you know, you can see with me, this is my lunge. It's a big long movement. This is my slip. It's a much shorter movement. And being a shorter movement means it's also quicker. So my opponent can move out of distance and cut. And if you've done a lot of boxing, you can even do this with head movement or body movement, you know, you just void your body. Which means that any movement that you do that can be reacted to by moving is probably going to get your counter cut. This is kind of a theme in this weapon. That isn't to say that you can't use big long lunges. Certainly people with very fast lunges can. I don't know if Chris is here, but Chris definitely has a bouncy enough lunge to get away with this. In general, you're going to use very short lunges. So all you're going to do is lunge the way you would in sabre or épée with a slight modification. Rather than doing a full extension and then lunging, you only extend about a third or half before doing a quick lunge. All right, so the motion is, I'm going to call extend. You extend about, what is this, like somewhere between a third and a halfway. Kick your foot out. And basically all you're doing is bringing your heel to where your toes are and rocking forward. And what I do as a trick with this is I just basically fall onto my front foot, like just rapidly do a weight shift. I'm going to be a little careful about doing that tonight just because my dogs don't seem to like me stamping on the ground too much. But you can certainly do that. So all the motion is extend, kick, lunge, retract. And also the retraction with this, if there are times when you'll pull straight back to guard, and I have this tendency to do that instinctively from sabre and épée, but there are also times when you'll extend, lunge out, and your traction will actually be to bring your knife all the way down. This isn't slashing, this isn't like a big slash. What this is getting your hand out of the way so that if your opponent slips and countercuts, they'll miss you. So let's just go through this by numbers. Extend, kick, lunge, retract, and guard. Extend, kick, lunge, retract, and back to guard. Extend, kick, lunge, retract, and back to guard. And I'll apologize now. It is a mistake. I make the mistake of making the retraction returning to guard often, but it is a mistake. And I do apologize for making a mistake whilst teaching, but look on the bright side. This way, you know, when you actually get to fence me, you'll know one of my weaknesses. So, you know, right. So from here, extend, kick, lunge, retract, and back to guard. Extend, kick, lunge, retract, and back to guard. Extend, kick, lunge, retract, and back to guard. All right. So obviously these are, like, I've been doing these deliberately at the height of the hand because again, the hand is the primary target. You can do them to other body parts, especially if your opponent is lying spent. So you might get someone who throws a cut. They're coming back like that, and then you go bang straight to the face because their knife is all the way down here. And I know I said to pull the knife down, and it's better to have it's better to give your opponent a target that's far away than it is to give them a target that's close. Because you will see this in knife fighting where you'll throw an attack, pull back, your opponent will go for your face, they'll miss, and then you can have a crack at their hand. And so a lot of knife fighting comes down to that distance game. So anyway, let's try that all as one smooth motion. So I'm just going to call lunge, and I want you to do everything in the order we just practiced, but as one smooth movement. It doesn't necessarily need to be super fast. In fact, what I recommend is practice doing this smooth, even practice in front of a mirror, getting the movement smooth, and then let yourself naturally speed up over time rather than focusing on being fast. Because if you focus on being fast, you'll naturally end up being really jerky, which is very telegraphic. Whereas if you focus on being smooth and non-telegraphic, as you naturally speed up, you'll retain that and you'll become, blisteringly fast. So let's give this a go. And lunge, 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 and lunge. All right, cool. So now, just for a bit of fun, let's try a deep lunge. What would be, well, what in any other, and the 19th century weapon would be considered a normal full lunge. In knife is, a deep lunge, because knife, very quick lunge is normal. And, very long lunges is, something you do when you're absolutely sure you can get away with it. But because we want to get away with it, what we're going to do is throw a cut, retract by bringing our foot out, and then lunging. The motion is cut, the opponent's arm, retract and kick. You see I'm kicking as far as I can, and from here, I'm thrust into the face. And this is a fairly normal offensive combination in knife. I chop the arm, my opponent pulls their arm away, or if I'm really lucky, I hit them and spoil their ability to countercut, and that's when I go for the face. So, go. So let's start off with chop, retract and kick, lunge the face, retract, and chop the arm, retract and kick, lunge the face, retract. Again, chop the arm, retract and kick, lunge the face, and retract. And once more for luck, chop the arm, retract and kick, lunge the face, and retract. And part of the reason why we retract and kick is I want to get this foot out here as soon as I can, so I've already effectively started my lunge, but I also don't want to commit. And if I'm here, my opponent does something unexpected or I don't think I can make it, I can just pull my leg back. I don't have to come forward. I'm not committed until I've lunged. And that means that I can get to here. If I'm here, my opponent is only just recovering. I'm ahead of them in sort of initiative, I guess. That's when I can go. And I'm not endangering myself necessarily. So let's try that. I mean, obviously it's two movements, so we're going to, but I'm just going to call attack, and I want you to throw your chop and then do the whole sequence in one go. So is everyone ready? Well, I hope so. If you're not, I can't hear you anyway, I'm sorry. But let's go. So, attack. 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 And attack. All right. So there's basically attacks on the lunge or attacks on the demi-lunge, and also like a kind of fun, cheaty way to gain some distance on your opponent. So does anyone have any questions before we move on?
Tim, I didn't quite understand after the lunge, the way you drop the knife down low before retracting.
Oh, so when I drop I drop the knife down. All I do is straighten my arm and just hold against my body. And the reason I do that is because the knife has no handguard and there's no protection. I need to get my knife hand retracted and safe as quickly as possible. Okay. So, because if I leave my hand extended, what can happen is my opponent will cut at my hand. So after I do the cut, I pull the knife down. I drop my hand straight down. Although I also do, but at the same time, I also practice it as a separate motion, because there are times when your opponent will react to your cuts in a way where not dropping and doing something else is advantageous. But yeah, the idea is basically the way I stop myself from being countercut, or I minimize the risk of being riposted, is dropping my hand.
Okay,
does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
From that. So Kirakat, how about a Fletch or Fletch? Fletch, I think is the correct pronunciation, or am I getting ahead? So short answer, Kirok, is you can use them. Certainly, like depending on what your opponent is doing, they're just one of those things that's really high risk, high reward. I personally, the only time I'd use them is if I was very confident I could get control of my opponent's knife hand, either through grappling or through an attack. But yeah, it's a very high risk thing, so it's probably like more of an advanced technique. You could use it. A lot of like sort of 20th century, 21st century fencing footwork works really well on knife. And as much as like people like to complain about modern Olympic fencing not being combative, it could still very, very easily be adapted to knife fighting, especially because it's so heavily distance based and so based on just charging in. But yeah, it's sort of, you'd want to be very good at fletching to do it at all, and it's very much like it's a technique that you would do very occasionally, and only if you're fairly confident you could get control of your opponent's knife. For those who don't know fencing, a fletch is where basically you basically just extend your weapon and run at your opponent. I'm not very good at these because I don't use them very often, but basically the idea is I kick out for a lunge, I extend and come forward like I would for a lunge or a short lunge, but instead of retracting, what I do is I keep falling forward and then I push off this leg as well and basically run at my opponent. It's also not great in confined spaces when you have windows, because I don't want to run into windows. It's very explosive, which is why it's popular with Olympic fencers, because it means that, especially if their opponent has defended a lunge by distance. So if I lunge, my opponent's defended by distance, I just keep coming forward at them and run in. With knife, probably the time you do it is when you can reach out and grab your opponent's knife as you're coming in. And then, yeah, if you can grab your opponent's knife, running in is the thing, running in and stabbing is the thing to do. Yeah, so hopefully answers your question, Kirok. And just to extend on that with grappling, Kirk says, I'd worry about losing balance. Yeah, I would too a bit, although not as much as I would with other weapons. Not because there's any less chance of losing balance with a knife, but weirdly enough, going low with a knife, going to the ground, is not a bad thing, not as bad a thing in a knife fight. So The only sources we have describing North American bowie technique is an article. Actually, it's a two-part article called "Tricks of the Mexican Bowie" or "Tricks of the Old Bowie Knife." I forget which. And there's a modern thing that uses the other one, which makes it very confusing for me. And the article is a newspaper journalist interviewing an old Bowie knife fighter about his techniques. And one of the things he says basically, when he says he's got like a few techniques he used when people would just run at him with a knife. Like he was out herding cattle. There'd be a dispute with another cowboy, and they'd rush at him with his knife, and he had like three different ways of basically intercepting them. None of these techniques are useful in a dueling setting, unfortunately. But he said basically if you do get in a duel, all you do is you get lower than your opponent. So, and there's actually an image of a Bowie knife fighter basically fencing from down here. And that goes back to what I was saying before about squatting and getting lower as a way of extending my full reach. If I get all the way down here, show you that from the side, I've got my full reach at like leg height. So it's very, very far away from my opponent's knife. And the only way you can necessarily counter that is to get low yourself. Or alternatively, to take a step backwards and just wait for them to stand up. But yeah, so falling over is not as bad with the knife as it would be with like a sword or a cane or something, purely by virtue of the fact that as long as you don't hurt yourself when falling over, you're not in near as much danger from being stabbed on the ground or attacked on the ground as you would be with a longer weapon. Oh, that makes sense. Right, so are there any other questions? Yep, I'll check there's a no, so I'm just going to, that's a chat message. That's good. Right, so I'm just going to pause recording.